You want to know what my favorite word is? Context. This word makes a big impact when discussing basketball and the NBA. However, so many fans and analysts just do not know how to use this or even know what it is. Today I felt like talking about why I feel this small word is the most important thing when discussing ball. In almost every basketball debate, you need to have some type of research to back up what you're saying. Now, sure, you can do some basic Google searches and find some okay info, but that never gives the full story. A lot of the time, people just go look at a stat sheet or box scores, and this is by far the worst way to form an opinion about a player or a topic. Digging deep within a topic can change the matter of the debate in so many ways. I want to cover multiple examples today where, if you add context, it changes the perception of the player or topic. Let's say, for example, when people use rings in a debate between two players. Not all rings are equal. Even though Dirk Nowitzki only has one ring, that single championship is better than most players that have multiple championships because of what he had to go through to get to that point. Kevin Durant may have 2 championships, but they are a lot less valuable because of how he created an unstoppable team and took the easy route towards the rings. This discussion leads to another aspect of the game in discussing the legacy of certain players. Take Patrick Ewing, for instance. He was constantly a top player during the 90s, where he was the main reason why the Knicks could be considered a title contender. He would lead them to a perennial 50 wins with averages of about 23-25 points on great rebounding and defense. However, I feel many people look over how great of a player he actually was, as there was a lack of context being put in his circumstance. When you look at his accolades, for example, you would notice that he does not have as many All-NBA selections as other all-time greats, mostly in part by how those selections were. He played during a time where there were multiple superstar centers like Hakeem, David Robinson, and Shaq, so the chances of him actually making the list is far lower compared to, let's say, a guard who has 6 chances to make it. This also applies to all defensive. Another part of his career that gets overlooked is how he played with no other major star. His teams were built well, but there was no other All-Star or All-NBA performer on the team for his entire 90s run. So when people see that he has no championships, keep in mind that he did not have the help like other stars during the time, like Karl Malone or Charles Barkley, who never won a ring. Tim Duncan is also subjected to a lack of context in his career. A lot of the time, the main argument that people use against him to minimize what he did as a player is that he played with a stacked roster. The main players that he played with were David Robinson, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, and Kawhi Leonard. First of all, 2 of those players were not even in their prime when they played with Duncan, those being Kawhi and David. And secondly, I really don't understand how Tony Parker and Manu created such a stacked roster. They were great players, no doubt about it, but comparing them to players that have played with LeBron James, Magic Johnson, or Larry Bird, are they really too much help for Tim Duncan? I don't really think so. Either way, this help didn't really come until much later in his career, where Duncan was transitioning to become more of a team player. Look at the 2003 NBA Finals, for instance. Tony Parker was a sophomore, Manu was a rookie, and David Robinson was on his last legs. And you know what Tim Duncan did? He carried this roster through a tough Western Conference with the likes of the Kobe and Shaq Lakers, averaged almost 25 points, 17 rebounds, and 5 blocks, and had a Game 6 in the Finals where he basically dropped a quadruple-double and led his team to a second championship in his 4th season. That is something special. Prior to the 2021 season, people were doubting if Steph Curry would be able to take the Warriors team into the playoffs without any major help that he usually gets. People are saying this even though a few seasons prior, he literally did the same thing. In 2013, he led the Warriors to 47 wins and into the playoffs without another significant star player. Sure, he had Klay Thompson, but he was a sophomore at the time and was not the same player during the 2015 to 2019 run. I remember people saying that because Curry is not on a stacked roster, he's not going to be able to play like a great player, and this will severely hurt his legacy. Please tell me, who in the NBA is going to carry a team like the 2021 Warriors to the play-in the way that Curry did it? Magic Johnson? I don't really know, because even though many people, including myself, consider him the best point guard of all time, he has never played with this type of roster because he always had a teammate like Kareem or James Worthy. No one makes a claim that he's not a top 10 player because he had too much help or didn't lead the Lakers to the playoffs with a poor roster as like a 7th seed. Inconsistency is a big time effect when no context is applied, because someone may say something about a certain player but not keep the same energy about another. LeBron James' finals losses are one of the most scrutinized parts of his career, even though other all-time greats have worse records. I wish people would just take the time to understand the context around this record. In 5 out of the 6 losses, he was facing all-time talent and basically should not have won. In 2007, the Cavs team was not going past the Spurs, especially when they had the correct defensive plan for LeBron, and that roster being utter garbage. In 2014, D-Wade was significantly worse than the 3 years prior, and the Spurs were being an all-time passing team. LeBron was not getting passed on his own. In 2015, Kyrie and Kevin Love were out, but somehow the Cavs were up 2-1, but LeBron did not have any help for the rest of the series. In 2017 and 2018, pretty much no one was going to beat that Warriors roster, especially in 2018 when the next best player on the Cavs was averaging 15 points in the playoffs. The only finals loss, in my opinion, that should count against LeBron is 2011. At that time, he was basically known as at least a top 5 player in the league and was in his prime. And in that series, he averaged a whopping 18 points, had a game where he scored only 8 points, and is known as a series where he was outscored by 33-year-old Jason Terry. That is embarrassing to say the least. This is one of the blemishes on his career that I feel should really hold him back. This, in my opinion, is one of the biggest meltdowns by a superstar in NBA history. People are always talking about how he has 6 losses, but if you look a little deeper, maybe you'll understand why. Most of the time, it's not his fault that his team lost. Michael Jordan has many dumb arguments that are used against him. For instance, let's take how people discredit his finals competition. Now, yes, his competition isn't that of like LeBron James. It's not that tier of difficulty with the Warriors and Spurs, but to downplay what Jordan faced just because he didn't really break a sweat is highly invalid. His competition was still around the 60 wins with a bunch of great duos. This is especially shown in the 1996 season when Jordan faced a 64-win Sonics team with a prime Gary Payton that gave MJ some struggles and could have had a chance of winning the finals, if not for a dumb coaching decision. There were no teams there where it was just a walk in the park for any normal player. Every team proved to be some type of threat. Another argument that's used against MJ is that he did not get past the first round multiple times and could not get to the finals that quickly, which I feel is just ignorant to say. First of all, before Pippen joined the team, do you know the teams that he was facing? Oh yeah, all-time teams like the 80s Bucks were a perennial 50-60 win team during the time. And oh yeah, the Celtics dynasty featuring Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish. With the team that Jordan had, I don't think anyone should expect him to be beating teams like the Celtics. Stars need some type of help to win championships. In the past few decades, there's only been like one player who actually won it without a star. Everyone else needed a star, and there's nothing wrong with that. For the last segment today, I want to cover some general issues that I see when it comes to certain players and their careers. This mainly having to do with how the Eastern Conference and Western Conference and how they both have been drastically different in certain points in history. When a player may not have the accolades like other all-time greats, it usually has something to do with the conference they are playing in. All-star selections are affected, and playoff matches could be easier or harder. Those are just some side effects that come from the conference that you may be in. This problem is rarely ever given any context, I think the perfect example would be in the 2007 finals run the Cavs had. I personally don't think that highly of the 2007 run. That's not to say it wasn't great. Bringing that team to the finals is already a hard enough task, but I think that it's been overblown a lot of the time. Leading to the finals, the Cavs faced two 41-41 teams in the Wizards and Nets, and then faced a Pistons team who were still pretty good, but were near the tail end of their run. That competition was not that great, and it made it much easier to get to the finals compared to any of the Western Conference teams. Adding context to the situation really changes the dynamic because it shows that the run was not all that great as people make it out to be. Now let's look at all of the 2000s where the West was just a doghouse every year. There's a reason why players like Steve Nash could not get past the hump. He was constantly playing a 50 or 60 win team every year. Looking further back into the 80s and 90s, people say that Michael Jordan played in the same weak East, when in fact he played in probably the toughest East. There were consistently around 450 win teams in the East throughout the 90s, just adding more difficulty for any of them to win. This was one of those times in NBA history where the conferences were more balanced, unlike in the 80s where the West was not great at that point, where it had only one 50 win team in the Lakers. There's a reason why the Lakers made the most finals that decade, and it's because of how they had a significantly easier route. That's not to discredit Magic Johnson and his crew, but context does need to be added to grasp the full picture. Context is my favorite word when it comes to any type of NBA discussion. When there's a lack of it, it just shows how much knowledge the other person has when it comes to basketball. This word changes the scope of an argument and can really bring in great discussion when used correctly. I know a lot of people on social media and on talk shows really do not show any context in their arguments, which is just a shame. Today I just wanted to bring some light to a word that's just not used enough in my opinion. Thanks for listening, sub, follow, do whatever, and I'll see you next time. Toodles!